tonight we're talking about how to prepare for the unexpected, from surprise injuries to natural disasters, political unrest, these things that we never want to have happen when we're traveling, but you never know. Sometimes they do. How can you prepare for that? And how can you minimize your risk? And we have guest experts tonight who are going to simplify for us how to minimize your risk, both financial and medical. And first, before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank our Wow Week sponsor, which is MedJet. MedJet is a travel emergency assistance membership. It offers medical transport. So like if you should end up hospitalized far from home, they'll get you back home to the doctor you trust and the hospital near your family, and it'll save you many tens of thousands of dollars. MedJet also offers crisis protection in case of a political threat or a natural disaster. They'll come to the rescue. I personally have had a MedJet Horizon family membership myself ever since my kids were little. And now that my son is a college junior, he's doing his semester abroad in Sydney, Australia. So I'm especially glad that we have that membership. So thank you, MedJet. And now, to really get started, let me introduce my colleague, Brooke Wilkinson. She's our executive editor at WendyPerrin.com, and she is also our resident expert on how to prepare for emergencies. Take it away, Brooke.
Thanks, Wendy, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to see quite a few familiar names listening in tonight. I know many of you, because part of what I do here is help travelers every day figure out how to plan the trip that they're trying that they're dreaming of, and more often than not, that involves some questions about insurance. So I've learned quite a bit through my career about the travel insurance industry. Before we start with the program, just a few housekeeping details. Make sure to open up the Q&A box in Zoom. Feel free to drop questions in there that we'll try to answer over the course of the next hour. And also watch there in that Q&A box for links to articles and other resources. Our colleague Flory is on the other side of things, adding links there throughout the hour. Thank you, Flory. So as Wendy said, our topic this evening is about how to prepare yourself. And we have two expert panelists with us to help answer these questions. So with us tonight, we have the best travel insurance guru I know, Stan Sandberg, who is the founder of travelinsurance.com. It's a great site. I've turned many travelers onto it because it's a really easy to use format. You input your trip dates, your trip costs, variables like your age, and the site generates side-by-side comparisons of different insurance policies that will best fit your needs. Also joining us is the wonderful Sherry Howell of MedJet, the program membership program that Wendy just described, that does medical transport and crisis response. We'll learn more about that program later on. So we've got a lot of questions. A lot of you wrote in with questions before, when you signed up for this Zoom, and we'll try to get to some of those as well. And I see there are already questions jumping into the Q&A box. So first, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork and get at kind of the basics of both travel insurance and emergency assistance. So Stan, I'll start with you. Can you just describe what a comprehensive travel insurance policy covers?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for that intro, Brooke. That was a great description. And thank you, Wendy.
I've used it myself, so I know.
And thank you, Wendy, for having me again. It's something I look forward to every year. So, the basics of travel insurance, you can think about travel insurance, the comprehensive plan, as breaking down into kind of two distinct coverages. The coverage that you have before you actually leave on your trip, which we refer to as the trip cancellation coverage. So when you buy your trip cancellation policy, the day you buy it, it's in effect the next day, and it'll cover you through the day you leave on your trip. And that kind of coverage will cover you for the unexpected event that might cause you to have to cancel. And there's a whole range of different events, or sometimes we call them perils in the industry. But these unforeseen kind of hazards, they're generally a wide range of them will, if something happens before you leave on your trip, you would have your non-refundable and prepaid expenses covered or reimbursed as a result. So that's before you leave on your trip. Then there's the post-departure benefits, which people are familiar with as well, which are medical expense coverage, and that's going to cover you for the unexpected illness or sickness that sends you to a doctor and where you have to seek treatment. Those costs would be covered under the medical expense coverage. There is, in most trip cancellation or comprehensive plans, also medical emergency evacuation coverage. A little different from what MedJet Assist provides, and what you'll learn in a few minutes is that they're actually complementary, the two products. And in fact, as Wendy mentioned, she's a MedJet Horizon family member. So is my family, and I have made sure that I have that coverage also in place when I travel. And then in addition to the evacuation, you're going to have other benefits like baggage loss, trip delay coverage, baggage delay coverage. Some plans will offer car rental collision damage waiver coverage, and so you really a whole host of things. And then and then finally, to sort of wrap it up, most plans are also going to provide 24/7 international global travel assistance. So there will be a third-party assistance company, sometimes handled by the actual insurance carrier, and sometimes it's a third party, but there's going to be regional expertise, and there's going to be concierge, there's going to be services that will be available to the traveler 24/7 in case an emergency comes up.
And how much should a traveler expect to pay for that kind of comprehensive policy that you just described?
Sure. So that kind of coverage is going to be dependent on the amount of trip costs you're insuring. So the more expensive your trip is, and the more you're insuring as a dollar amount, the more expensive the premium of the insurance will be. It also factors in the age of the traveler, like most other insurance products. So an older traveler is going to pay a higher premium than a younger traveler. It's a fair way to look at it would be, think about it as somewhere between 4 or 5% of your trip costs up to 10 to 11% of your trip costs. And as you get to the sort of premium end of the spectrum of plans, that could go even a little bit higher when you start adding optional upgrades like a cancel for any reason upgrade. Then you could see the overall percentage of your trip costs go up even more. But think about it as like sort of 4 to 10% is a pretty good range. And that's going to get you a pretty accurate ballpark when you're thinking about planning for your trip.
Right, and budgeting that as well, right?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Sherry. So from my understanding, travel insurance does come with some medevac coverage. So why does a traveler need a membership like MedJet if their insurance carrier will already medevac them in case of an emergency?
Well, thank you for having me. The same question that we get asked on a daily basis, which is, if I have travel insurance and it has $1 million worth of medevac, why do I need MedJet? If you look at the fine print on almost every travel insurance policy, if not every travel insurance policy, it clearly states that the emergency medical evacuation in those types of policies is geared to get you to the nearest hospital capable of treating your illness or your injury. So that means that if you, let's say that real life example, let's say that you have a car accident outside of Paris, in the countryside of Paris. Somebody's going to call 911. They're going to race you to the local hospital. If it's so bad that you have to be medevaced to a hospital or a trauma center in Paris, it's going to cover all of that. It covers getting you to the nearest hospital that's capable of stabilizing you and treating you. That's the language in there, is nearest acceptable hospital. They'll move you further if it's medically necessary. Once you get to a hospital that they deem acceptable, you're stuck there. They will not move you to a hospital at home just because you want to be treated at home, just because you want to be treated by your own doctors, if it's not medically necessary. If you have a MedJet membership, that's what we do. So it's kind of like travel insurance is the cake of your coverage to get you stable. MedJet is the icing. It gets you moved home just because you want to be treated at home. And depending on how much medical coverage you took out on that policy, you know, if it's going to be a really long recovery or extensive treatments, then it does become really important to get back to your home healthcare coverage, which typically has much higher medical limits than a travel policy would.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, I'd love to hear from both of you about this next question. So let's say a traveler knows they have a heart condition, but their doctor has given them the sign off that it's safe for them to travel. How does an insurance company and then also MedJet, how do you handle a pre-existing condition like that?
Maybe I'll start here because it's one of the coverages and benefits which is very important to our customers, and we get the question a lot. It's really important to understand this, especially if you do have a pre-existing medical condition. As a starting point or as a default, travel insurance is actually going to exclude losses that result from a pre-existing medical condition, unless you buy a plan that offers what's called a pre-existing condition waiver. And many plans offer it. At the economy level type of plan, you may not see that as an availability, but for the standard plans and the more premium plans, generally you will see a pre-existing condition waiver as part of the plan. However, there are some requirements in which you need to meet in order to qualify for this waiver. The first one is that most plans are tied to the purchase date and the day you purchased the plan from the date you made that first payment towards the trip, or what we call the initial trip deposit date. So if you are planning a wonderful trip and you want to reserve your spot and you put your $50 or $100 or maybe $500 non-refundable deposit down on that trip, actually that's when the clock starts ticking with respect to buying a travel insurance plan that has these time-sensitive benefits, including the pre-existing condition waiver. So we recommend people who are thinking about that to remember that once you've made that payment, go and buy your travel insurance. In fact, you don't have to buy the travel insurance for the full amount of the trip yet. It's only the amount that you've paid for the trip. So just ensure that $500 when you make subsequent payments, maybe it's in 6 months from now or a year from now, then you add those amounts to your policy. And what effectively you've done is you've locked in that pre-existing condition waiver. And so, you can sort of go along that timeline of making payments for the trip, and you will still have that waiver. Again, you have to add those costs to the trip.
Does the waiver cost anything, or it's just based on you just have to get in that window of...
Some plans will price in what we'll call a premium for the waiver, but the vast majority of plans are going to include it, or the ones that do offer it will include it if you qualify based on that purchase date. And so that purchase date can range from 7 days from your initial deposit date to 21 days from your initial deposit date. There are some tour-friendly plans out there that will tie it to your final trip payment date. So as long as you've purchased your insurance within, the language typically is within 24 hours of your final trip payment, then you will still qualify. So if you missed it by a week up front, there are plans out there that are available as long as you purchase it by that final trip payment date. And so, it's really important that one who is concerned about a pre-existing condition purchases and qualifies for that. Maybe I won't get too far into the weeds of what is a pre-existing condition, because different plans will have sort of a different way of looking at it. But I think one of the sort of simple general rules to think about is take the day you're buying the insurance, look back either 90 days, some plans are looking back 180 days. Some plans actually are even just looking back 60 days. And if within those 60, 90, 180 days, you visited your doctor about your condition, maybe you had a change in prescription, or you were just visiting that doctor and you had to seek whatever the case is. If you had to go to your doctor for your condition, that would then qualify the condition as a pre-existing condition. If you are if you're on what we, again, I'm not a doctor, and this is where it's important to read the fine print, speak to an agent that relates to your specific trip when you're planning here. But again, a general rule is if you are just on sort of what we call like sort of maintenance medication, you haven't had a change in prescription, you haven't had to go to your doctor, you just, every day for the last 6 months, you've done the same exact thing every morning, you've taken that pill, your condition is fine, that actually wouldn't be considered a pre-existing condition under the definition in most plans. Again, I'm not necessarily doing it the greatest justice in this form, but it's one of those things that if you're thinking about it, it's very important to make that a focal point when you're buying insurance.
And there are a lot of other reasons, which we'll probably get into later in the hour, to buy insurance as soon as you make that first payment. So we can get into it here. But Sherry, I'd love to hear from you how MedJet considers pre-existing conditions.
We don't. I mean, we have no pre-existing conditions under age 75. For people who are over 75, our Diamond membership it is a query process, and we will ask, it's probably about 6 medical questions, but it's really just to double check that your doctor thinks that you should be traveling. And in that instance, if there is something significant, there's the potential that we might rule that out. But that's only 75 plus. And, that's the way that we operate, is a disclosure process prior. I know that there's other companies that don't ask that question, but if you read the fine print, they still have that language where they have the option of ruling that out if they deem it to be a pre-existing condition. So we just prefer to be really upfront so people don't get an unpleasant surprise.
And Brooke, I think, maybe another way to look at it too is that the pre-existing condition waiver is really designed to, excuse me, and travel insurance in general is designed to protect you against the unforeseen or the unexpected event that disrupts your trip. So, like, for example, what the examples I was talking about just earlier, where someone has a condition and they've been, taking medication for it. Again, it's important to make sure you have the details down right. But what travel insurance is also trying to avoid is someone who has a trip plan, they didn't purchase travel insurance, and 3 days before they break their arm, and now they want to buy travel insurance to, cover their trip. And so that's one of the, I guess it's one of the things that prevents that from happening for the travel insurance issuers.
Oh, you'd be surprised how many people try to sign up for MedJet from their hospital bed in a foreign country. You can't.
Yeah, if you realize you need it, it may be too late. Something you gotta think about before you need it. Yeah. Well, I want to make sure we get to questions in the Q&A from the audience listening right now. So I've got plenty of other questions I'd love to ask you, but let's jump into some of those. We've got a couple different questions about annual policies. This is something that I'm hearing more and more from travelers, that there are policies where you can pay, one premium, cover yourself for all of your trips over the course of a year. Yeah. Dan, what are the pros and cons of that kind of policy?
Yeah, in fact, they are becoming more popular. We've sort of thought they'd become more. They were becoming more popular sort of every year for the last 5 years, and COVID aside for a second, they haven't. We haven't seen the growth that we were expecting, but they are becoming more popular. because like you said, if you are a frequent traveler, you're taking typically more than 2-3 trips a year. If you're in the 3-4-5 trips a year, that might be a time to consider it. The plans, can be more expensive than a single trip plan, but they are going to give you coverage for up to a year of travel. And probably the biggest difference is annual plans historically were primarily medical plans with evacuation coverage, but they didn't have a trip cancellation component to it. So it wasn't about protecting the investment in your trip. It was just protecting you when you traveled and if something went wrong and you had to go to the hospital. Now there are plans that will provide a level of trip cancellation protection. Typically it's not a large amount of coverage. It could be 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000. I don't know of any of the plans out there today are even in excess of 10,000. So if you have an expensive trip or you take expensive trips, it may not be the best option for you. But then it's also important to note that that's a cumulative number. So if you have $5,000 of trip cancellation on your annual plan, and on the first trip you use it, then that's the max limit. So you wouldn't have that coverage on your subsequent trips during that coverage period.
Right. Okay, and Sherry, your product already is an annual plan, right? So that's not really a change. You do also have a shorter term membership.
We have short-term memberships for 8-day, 15-day, 21, 30-day trips. I never understand why people buy the 30-day because it's about $20 extra to get the rest of the year. So, but most people purchase the annual memberships.
And Brooke, I will say this: like, I went into some of the nitty gritty detail there, but look, the fact is, it's a very convenient product if you're traveling frequently during the year, because you buy once and you have that coverage for multiple trips. You don't have to think about it. I do see it becoming a more popular product in 2024, and more providers are starting to come out with annual plans too. So I think that's probably also an indication that there's demand in the market for it.
And it may be something where you have that for your regular, your business trips, your short weekend trips, and then you add on a policy if you are taking a large trip with significant non-refundable costs.
Yes.
You add on additional coverage for that single trip.
Yes, you could do that. Understanding that only one plan would apply to a claim situation. So it would, you couldn't make a claim on one plan and make a claim on the other plan.
Right, can't double dip.
Yes.
Okay, we have a question about coverage for COVID. I know, generally speaking, insurance providers are treating COVID as they would any other illness. But this particular traveler says they've just been on a cruise where 2 family members were unfortunately isolated in their cabins for most of the cruise. I'm assuming it's with COVID. What sort of policy offers coverage for that?
Well, I guess without knowing the real specifics of the situation, in a case where the individual, because of COVID or another sickness, had to end the trip early, then the unused portion of the non-refundable trip costs would likely be reimbursable under a trip interruption benefit. If they merely just isolated in the room at the direction of the doctor, I don't think that would fall under trip interruption. There's probably travel delay coverage that would cover some additional costs potentially. And so again, that one's a little tricky. That again, if there's coverage for plans under the travel delay coverage, that if you get COVID and then you have to quarantine or you have to sort of extend the trip beyond what you had expected originally, there would be coverage for those additional costs. So in this case, I don't think there's necessarily a reimbursement for the time spent isolated in the cabin. But if the individual who asked the question did purchase an insurance plan, whether it's through the cruise line or through a third party, that would be a very simple question to answer from the claims administrator.
Can I pile on that one?
Yeah,
absolutely.
What would it cover? Like if you'd booked excursions, it's my own personal knowledge. If you had booked an excursion and lost the money on the excursion, would it cover stuff like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It would cover if you lost excursion expenses, non-refundable expenses, again, prepaid. So you'd already paid for them and they would subject to loss as a result of not being able to do them because of COVID or any other covered reason. Yes, those would be reimbursable. The question is whether the cost of the cruise would be reimbursable under that situation because you didn't end the trip and return back. Again, that would be a question a claims administrator would be able to answer very quickly.
Listener David asks, does any comprehensive policy cover pet illness or death as a reason to cancel?
In fact, yes, there are plans that are very pet friendly. And I can point to a couple of plans. Travel Guard has a plan called the Preferred Plan, which offers a pet bundle as an optional upgrade. And they also have a deluxe plan that is pet friendly. And there are a number of plans that offer coverage, in some cases for kenneling fees if you're delayed and you for a covered reason and you can't get back and there's additional kennel fees. There are plans that offer that trip cancellation as a result of a pet getting sick or a death of a pet. And
you can check on travelinsurance.com, like pet friendly plans, or can you tell us which ones?
That's a place to go. And the way to sort of identify that is looking under the trip cancellation covered reasons. And then also under the medical expense, if there is pet medical expense coverage, that would be listed there as well. And then picking up the phone is also a quick way to get an answer.
I so often, tell travelers when they have specific questions, get on the phone with a representative of the insurance company you're looking at and give them, explain to them what your concern is or what scenario you're trying to get covered.
Yes.
Susan asks, when is the best time to buy trip insurance? So we've already talked about covering pre-existing medical conditions and having to get into that. I think you said 7 to 21 day kind of window ranges, but within a week or two of the first trip payment.
Yes.
My understanding of that, by the way, some people ask, well, I paid a $500 fee to the planner so that they can then design an itinerary. If it's a fee that is not going toward the cost of your trip, that does not start the clock. My understanding is that does not start the clock for this, for getting the pre-existing medical coverage. If that $500 will eventually count toward the cost that you pay for the trip, that does start the clock. So that's a question we've gotten. So that's one reason to buy insurance soon after you make that first trip payment. Stan, help me out, but I believe it's also cancel for any reason policy, an upgrade that requires buying a policy soon after that first payment. Also kind of the financial stability of the travel provider, right? Can you talk about that a bit as well?
Yeah, so those are the three big ones, and I'd put pre-X waiver and the cancel for any reason is really the two sort of most asked about and most probably the biggest ones. And then the financial default of a travel supplier is another one that has this time sensitivity. That one typically tends to be 14 days. irrespective of the wait period for CFAR or cancel for any reason we refer to as CFAR, just so everyone knows, or the pre-existing condition waiver. So all those you will want, if you're interested in any of those, you'll want to purchase your insurance right away within that time frame. I think the other sort of reason why you would want to purchase your insurance early, outside of these optional upgrades that have a time sensitivity, is really just to get your coverage in place before something happens which would affect your trip and cause you to have to cancel, which at that time would be too late to buy the insurance. So once you're insured, you're protected. You can't wait for something to occur in order to realize I need insurance.
And that could be you breaking your leg, or a hurricane hitting the island. Either way, if you haven't bought the insurance yet, you're sadly out of luck.
Exactly. And even outside the hurricane season, a named storm, if it's on the weather map, it's no longer insurable. So it's really getting all of those things in place. You can't predict what's going to happen. FAA shutdowns, other types of travel snafus. I mean, even volcanic eruptions in Iceland can disrupt travel. So those are all compelling reasons to purchase early, and and then you sort of have peace of mind. You don't have to worry about it. But in terms of those benefits, again, there is a strict requirement that in order to qualify for those benefits, you do have to purchase early.
Yeah, I mean, my routine is just as soon as I've put down my first trip payment, the next thing on my list is insurance. It's just there's really no reason to wait. Edward asked, why doesn't New York have cancel for any reason CFAR, as you just mentioned, a upgrade? Some states have it and some don't, huh?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a thorn in our side for years, and we thought actually during COVID that it might get resolved, because at one point the Department of Financial Services, which regulates the insurance and financial services industries in New York, was talking about making it available in New York, but that didn't happen. One of the reasons why dates back to, and I don't know what the exact date is, but really just the New York's interpretation of what insurance is, and they deemed cancel for any reason to not really be insurance at all. It's more like a rebate, and so they didn't think it appropriate to sell with a travel insurance plan. And so it really comes down to this sort of regulatory reading. And we are hopeful, though, that at some point we'll be able to overcome that, and it'll be a product that is available to New Yorkers, because New York also represents one of the biggest states for consumers interested in purchasing travel insurance. And so, I think it does us a disservice. I live in New York, so I can say this, that gives us, gives us a sort of a disadvantage to the rest of the country in terms of what's available. And so it really comes down to that. And again, I am hopeful that that we will be able to solve that. And but
talk to your legislator, I guess, is the best answer for now. Anne asks, can you address how to make sure there's a beneficiary on whatever plan you take, or is it only for the travelers? That's an interesting question. Can others benefit from the policy?
Well, there are some plans that offer AD&D coverage, which is the abbreviation for accidental death and dismemberment. So those are types of coverages that would enable you to have a named beneficiary. So in the event that something occurred, God forbid, a death on a trip, that payout would go to your beneficiary. And if you don't have a named beneficiary, it would just follow whatever the probate laws are in your state. But nevertheless, there is a possibility of being able to name a beneficiary for those benefits. For For other benefits, though, they're really really more designed for the actual traveler themselves.
Edward asks, what kind of coverage is there for mental health issues? Is that covered under, covered reasons for cancellation or interruption, say?
So this one is actually is changing in some states, and so this one is some states are actually many plans will have a list of general exclusions of coverage, and again, that's probably one of the places I'd first turn to and in evaluating a policy to see what those general exclusions are. Some of them are probably less relevant, like a toxic spill would be excluded, or if you're playing professional sports or combat sports, that's excluded. And certain things that may seem somewhat obvious, if you're traveling for the purposes of medical treatment or cosmetic medical treatment, then that's excluded. So, but nevertheless, you in some states, for instance, suicide would be excluded, and some states are now removing that exclusion. But the general question about mental health, it typically is not generally covered, but again, the cancel for any reason would be the way to approach it today. And I don't have the specific states on hand right now. Something I'd be happy to follow up and send to you, Brooke and Wendy, with a little kind of matrix of how different states are handling it.
Okay, great. So if you still have questions, please write to questions@WendyPerrin.com and we can try to get you answers. Elizabeth asks, can you just cover non-reimbursable costs in your policy, or do you have to include all costs for the trip? I get this question a lot, really around airfare. If you have refundable airfare, can you not include that in the cost of the trip that you're insuring and then keep the premium down a bit?
Yeah, in fact, if you are not looking for a pre-existing condition waiver and you're not looking for a cancel for any reason optional upgrade, you can insure as much or as little of the trip as you want. There's not a requirement to insure the entirety of your trip costs, unless you want the two benefits I just talked about. They actually have a requirement that you insure 100% of your non-refundable prepaid trip costs. If you have refundable trip costs, then you don't have to include those. Now, it's important that the way the carriers will define that is trip costs that even are subject to penalty if you cancel. So you might consider that, oh, it's refundable, but I'll just have to pay a $250 change fee or a penalty. For the carriers, that would be considered a non-refundable trip costs that have to be included in your trip costs, or trip costs subject to a penalty. So you would have to include that in your trip costs. Again, if you are not, if you don't need the pre-X waiver and you're not looking for CFAR, you can insure as much or as little of your non-refundable trip costs. And
what if your airline, a lot of airlines since COVID have been more flexible, not charging a penalty to rebook. You get a credit, if you cancel your airline tickets, they give you a credit, which you must use by a certain date, and then you put that toward the cost. So there's no penalty per se.
Yeah, so that one, again, unless it's a fully, unless it's a fully refundable ticket without any sort of attachments to it, then that would not have to be included in your trip costs for the purposes of those of the pre-X waiver and CFAR. But if unless it's fully refundable, you should include it.
included if you want that. Okay.
And prepaid, again, that's the important part too.
Aaron asks, what do you think about those clearinghouses like Squaremouth? Well, so travelinsurance.com is, I guess you could call it a clearinghouse. It is a website similar to Squaremouth. They both are kind of aggregator sites that have pull data from a lot of different insurance companies and then give you, make it easier for you to compare policies side by side. I'll say, as I've done research over the years, I just found the user interface of travelinsurance.com to be very user friendly, but there are other sites out there, it's like Squaremouth is one of them.
Absolutely. And we call them comparison sites or comparison marketplaces. And yes, they're viable options. And thank you, Brooke, for those compliments, because one of the differentiators that travelinsurance.com has and that we're very proud of is that we came into the industry about 10 years ago. In fact, Squaremouth had been doing it for maybe 10 years prior to us coming into the market, and there were a couple of others who also predated us. But when we came into the market, we didn't come into the market from an insurance carrier's perspective. We came in from a consumer. How do we simplify the world of travel insurance? How do we make it easy? How do we get the information a couple of clicks away in a totally transparent way? And, to give people a sense of confidence when they're shopping for it on their own. And so that's really in our DNA to make it easy for the consumer. And I think, part of that mission sort of filtered out into the rest of the industry. And so it was interesting to see that, after we started to establish ourselves as one of the fastest growing companies in the industry, we started to see our competitors start doing things that really resembled what we had introduced. So, but yeah, as an option, look, the fact is, the one place I think is the one place you're going to see insurance, which may not be the best option, is when you're going to an airline and they offer you that sort of checkbox at the end, take it or leave it, sort of single option. That tends not to be the best coverage that's available out there, and you can generally find more comprehensive and sometimes more affordable coverage by going to the comparison site. So you don't have to take that checkbox, whether it's with the cruise companies or the airlines.
They always make it sound like you're being reckless, No, I
exactly.
don't want to,
But look, the fact is, but I'd rather have consumers take that than not take anything at all. But you're gonna generally find a better result if you go to a comparison site like travelinsurance.com.
Okay, Margaret asks, MedJet says 75 to 84 for Diamond. That's what you call the membership for that age group. What about over 84?
We have that. That's Platinum.
Okay.
Same process. You call, you get the questionnaire sent out, you fill that out, have your doctor sign off on some questions and get it back to us.
So there's no age cutoff at which you will no longer, as long as a doctor tells you that this person's ready to travel, you will welcome them into your membership. Okay.
Yep.
Another question, Sherry, for you. Karina asks, since MedJet is available only in the US, Canada, and Mexico, do you know of any MedJet equivalent companies in Asia? I guess this traveler is based in Asia. Anyone?
Yeah, well, I saw that one. And for clarity, the services are global. We just sell to residents of the United States, Canada, and Mexico, so residents of North America. But if you have an accident or an illness in China or Japan or in anywhere in Asia, your benefits are in effect. So just to be clear, I do not know what companies. I know that there's a lot of them in Europe. I am not familiar with specific names of companies in Asia. It's not a market we service, so I don't
sure if the U.S. embassies might be a source to go to.
Yeah.
Nancy asks, can you give examples of people who benefited from MedJet? They've flown back from Budapest, for example, back home to New York City.
Yeah, yeah. If you go to our website, we've got a whole page, and I just had to actually create yet another page and another page of testimonials from people. That I love it when they actually will tell their story on camera. I think one of the most, we get tons of river cruise. That Budapest, I'm actually going on the Budapest to Prague portion of it, and we get a lot of those because the gangways on those river boats, they're far less stable than the big giant ocean liners. And big wave comes by, big boat comes by, and they're just, we get a lot. uh I mean, like specific examples, travel advisor, who was also a member. She sells a bunch of medjet, but also was personally a member. Slipped in her hotel room in Malawi, broke her hip, did not want a hip replacement surgery in Malawi. So that was really an interesting one, because we don't own our aircraft. We actually have affiliates all over the world. And that one, there was one air ambulance and crew that took her from Malawi, and they did what's called a wing-to-wing transfer on the tarmac in Turkey, so that crew was refreshed and could make it back to her hometown in the U.S. That one actually got written up in Travel and Leisure. Thank you.
So
Yeah, and you get to go. You don't have to go to your home hospital. We had a gentleman who broke. These are awful stories. He broke his neck surfing in Nicaragua, and the hospital in Nicaragua actually didn't even want to touch him. But his brother was a surgeon, and so by time we had an aircraft there, he actually had arranged for him to have his neck repaired, like spinal surgery at the top surgery center in the US, instead of going to North Carolina. Unfortunately, we have people, that get diagnosed with, like cancer, or have really serious heart issues while they're traveling abroad. And rather than going to their hometown hospital, we'll take them to like the Cleveland Clinic, or we'll take them to John Hopkins or the Mayo Clinic. So I mean, it's example after example, slip and falls, food poisoning, that turns into, catastrophic organ failure that gets you, stuck in a hospital. I could go on. The security
we
stuff.
we have a neighbor. We have a neighbor here in Short Hills, New Jersey, who had an e-bike accident in Barcelona, was visiting her son during his semester abroad. And she got flown back here to New Jersey through MedJet. She was thrilled she had that.
Yeah, we get more and more e-bike stuff.
Yeah.
Security, the security response, we don't really, the medical stuff, it's easy, you can kind of generalize it. The security stuff is always really very personal, a lot of times very traumatic, and so we don't dive too much into that. But we have had people stuck in riots, situations like Israel, natural disasters. We had just added pandemic right before the pandemic. That was fun. And so those are disappearance, kidnapping, hijacking, natural disaster, pandemic, terrorism.
Yeah, a follow-up to
wrongful detention, violent crime. I mean, you name it. But the security teams can respond a lot faster. They don't require government issued hard triggers in order to respond. You really can call them anytime you don't feel safe. I could go on for like 6 days on specific stories, so I'll turn it back.
Nancy asked in follow-up, does MedJet help find an appropriate hospital and assist with admission?
The hospital that the person wants to be admitted to is generally determined by family insurance and their primary physician. We don't get super involved in selecting a hospital. That is a medical decision, you know, between entities that we don't really have influence in or, you know, advice for. But certainly we facilitate the pre-admission paperwork, the pre-admission, the transfer of medical reports from the one hospital, the attending physician to the new physician. And when a team shows up at your bedside at that, you know, the hospital that you're in, they actually don't leave your side until they have handed off all the paperwork, all of the information and medical records. So it is very, very well handled.
Trisha asks, how much does a MedJet membership cost? Can you briefly explain
Sure. MedJet Assist, which is the medical transport membership, that starts at $99 for an 8-day trip. And then we have MedJet Horizon short term that adds that short term, I think those start at $189. Most people get the annual memberships. Those start MedJet Assist for an individual, $315, MedJet Assist for a family, and family constitutes 2 cohabitating adults, so doesn't have to be married, and 2 cohabitating adults and up to 5 dependent children up to age 19 or 23 if they are a full-time student. So those are $425. MedJet Horizon, which is the air medical transport plus the travel security benefits, that starts at $474 for an individual and is $614 for a family.
And I believe
there's a special Wow Week discount
for a year. Yeah.
Just so everybody knows, there's a special Wow Week discount thanks to Sherry of up to $50 off new annual memberships.
Right, for families. And I think it's 35 off for individuals for this week. So it's insanely affordable. I come from more of the entertainment luxury industry, and it's funny, I always make when my friends find out that I'm working for MedJet now and I explain all the stuff that it covers and all the responses, and then I make them guess how much it's going to cost. And I do bias the jury because I'm like, and now remember, we all pay about $3,000 to belong to the Soho House to drink really expensive drinks, right? So, and inevitably they start at about $15,000 and then it's like $5,000. And by the time you get to $614 a year for a family of up to 7 people with, you know, air medical transport that can cost up to $200,000 plus like 24/7 security response, they're pretty flabbergasted. So it is a good deal if you travel a lot.
And I'll just add to that because again, I'm a MedJet Assist member myself, my family. It's one of those things like I have adult kids. You know, they fit the, you know, the age requirement for the plan still. But just having my student knowing that he's got the card when he's traveling with his friends, has that coverage in place. And then whenever my family travels, it really is one of those things like it's, you know, I have my MedJet Assist card and I feel, you know, good about the protection that's going to afford me if we're ever in a real bind.
It's amazing for kids. I personally buy it out of my own pocket for my friends who if I can't convince them to do it, I will do it out of my pocket. I did that for my old roommate's daughter when she went to Europe because I was like, if she just disappears, I know I'm going to get the phone call. I'm just going to buy this for her and not even tell them. And I bought it for a friend of mine who sent her kid down to Chile. And she called me panicked one day because he was on the subway at the time that subway riot, like all the riots broke out in Santiago because they had raised the cost of the subway. and she was just like, she could barely get the words out. And I was like, Amy, do I need to call somebody? Like, do we need to call them? And she's like, he's having the time of his life. Viva la revolution. But I am freaked out. So, instances like that, it is really, really comforting. And you don't need to be traveling together. It covers each individual member on that membership, wherever they go for the year.
Stan, getting back to the insurance side of things, Nancy also asked, we're going on a river cruise and Viking gave us insurance, and I'm thinking we need more. Yes. Now, I know one thing, obviously, when you buy a plan through a cruise company or a tour company, if that entity goes out of business, if they default, their plan is probably not going to cover you. Are there other reasons that you would want additional coverage over what they would give you?
Well, one way to check that is to find out who's actually underwriting the insurance for the river cruise company, because if it's the cruise company itself that's like self-insuring, that may give you pause, and that might, that there may be reason to be nervous there. However, if it's underwritten by another underwriter in the industry, which many times it will be,
AIG
you could,
or
AIG
or
or
like
Generali, typically those are, or Berkshire, for instance. The underwriters are very sound financially, so I don't think you need to worry about that necessarily. So I think it depends on what the coverage is, understanding what are the reasons for the cancellation. Are there cruise specific coverages in being offered? And so, and then the benefit limits, like is the medical expense coverage, if it's only $15,000, well, you may decide you want something with 50,000 or 100,000. That would be a reason to go outside or go above and beyond what they've offered. And there are plans that do offer even sort of specific benefits for cruises that will pay inconvenience fees if you can't make it to a port of call that was on the scheduled itinerary. You can get reimbursement up to certain dollar amounts for cruises that have to be rescheduled because of either too much water or too little water, preventing it from cruising. So there are plans out there that might resemble very much the one that's offered by the cruise company, and maybe even has a little bit better coverage. Again, in the instance when you're working with a tour company, or purchasing directly from the cruise company, it's better to get it and then to not get it. But if you can take the 10 minutes, in fact, it may be even 5 minutes out of your day to see what else is out there, you may just find yourself in a better situation.
Now we're coming up at the end of our hour, and we still have a bunch of open questions. So maybe we can do a kind of a lightning round on these last few and get through as many as we can.
Sure.
Shelley asks, does MedJet cover medical costs while traveling? Sherry?
No, we are strictly the hospital to hospital. We always recommend people have travel insurance, and we always recommend at least the medical component of it. If you choose not to insure, like the cost of the trip, at least take out the medical, and we recommend a minimum of 50,000, just in case it can rack up if you get stuck with a really serious issue and you can't get moved home quickly. It's important that you be stable, and that really can exceed the 15 that some of the minimal policies do.
And speaking of minimums, Duncan asked, my wife and I are in our early 60s, active with no pre-existing conditions. We have paid for a 6-week trip this fall. I've avoided any kind of travel insurance for my entire life and never had an incident. That's great. What would you recommend as minimal insurance for our situation? Total trip cost is roughly $40,000. So what are the minimum amounts that you would recommend to cover?
Yeah, so I would say that if that $40,000 is at risk, if that is non-refundable, you want to insure that. If you are traveling somewhere, that might be, a remote destination, you will want to have you'll want to have medical expense coverage and evacuation coverage, which are going to come with the comprehensive plan. But then, you know, a MedJet Assist membership would also be you know, important. But you can if you've got $40,000 at risk, you want a policy that's going to you know, provide the basic trip cancellation reasons. You're not you wouldn't need to cancel for any reason necessarily, and in this case, because you've made the payments for the trip 6 weeks ago, it wouldn't be available anyway. But nevertheless, you know, the coverage in case you get sick before you go, depending on what time of year you're traveling and where you're traveling to, there might be you know, weather or, you know, environmental you know, issues that could come up and prevent you from going. Look, the you know, the truth is that you know, all these things can happen, and a travel insurance plan can protect you. But if, for instance, if you know, a grandparent were to pass away before your trip, a travel insurance plan is going to provide coverage there for trip cancellation or trip interruption. So, you know, there's some standard coverages which I think are, you know, really important to consider. And especially if you've got a very big ticket priced trip, you know, on the line, you don't want to, you know, I personally don't think you want to risk, you know, losing that for something that could be preventable with a policy that may only cost you, you know, several $100s, or in this case, for that size trip, maybe it's $1,000, but as a percentage of the cost of the trip, it
What
makes
about
a lot
on
of sense.
the medical side of things? Do you have an advice about the minimum amount of medical coverage that one should take out?
Well, I think as a starting point, I agree with Sherry, $50,000. That's pretty standard. You can go lower than that. When you think about you know, some of the European countries that have visa requirements for coverage, I think that at one point was 35,000 euro, but you know, translating that up to, you know, 50,000 of coverage, you know, gets you there. And you know, and many plans now offer 100,000, offer 150,000 of coverage, 250,000 of coverage. So it really depends on what your sort of personal sort of considerations are, what's important to you. But again, you know, as a minimum, 50,000. And if you're in that range on the evacuation piece, which will come with a travel insurance plan, you'll typically see somewhere between 250,000 to 500,000 or $1 million of coverage on those plans. So that's fairly standard. And again, if you know, maybe you're you know, a 20-year-old backpacker who's taking, you know, a trip domestically, the US, not a lot of trip costs, you know, then you know, a more economy level plan may be perfectly suitable for you. And maybe, you know, you have your health coverage, and so you don't need 50,000, and, you know, 10,000 or 25,000 is sufficient.
Great.
And then you still get MedJet because it'll still move you home domestically.
Yes.
Yes, that 250,000
you know,
you're talking about medical evacuation, that's getting you to the hospital in the country, or, you know, something close to where you've had your accident or your issue. That's not getting you home, even if it would cover it.
Get asked about that, like with cruises all the time. Like, you know, who's going to come get me if I'm sick on a cruise? Who's going to medevac? We actually just put a webpage up because we get that question so frequently. And it's so highly dependent on whose water you're in, what type of ship it is, what the weather conditions are, but it's the Coast Guard. It's either the U.S. Coast Guard if you're in U.S. waters, or the international Coast Guard stuff. And then from there, insurance and MedJet.
Shelley asks, when is the coverage you receive from the credit card you use to purchase the trip sufficient?
We were just talking about this earlier.
Yeah, we were just talking about this.
We're all just comparing credit cards.
Yeah, so it does depend somewhat on the credit card. The premium credit cards will typically have a decent set of benefits. They typically cap out at $10,000 of trip cancellation coverage. That'll be the limit. They tend to have fewer covered reasons for trip cancellation, and excuse me, they may have maybe more exclusion. So yeah, it's important to take a look and understand what your credit card offers. And then I think the probably the most important part would be to find out whether your credit card offers coverage across all of your trip costs on a particular trip, or if it's just the trip costs that you've purchased on that credit card. So one way to, again, simplify it is to use your credit card more as a backstop. Maybe if go out and get a comprehensive plan, so all of your trip costs are covered under a single plan. If you're in a claim situation, it just makes the claims process that much easier. You don't have to sort of piecemeal around like who's covering what, and so that's what we typically recommend.
And still always take out the medical, because I just dug through. I have a platinum card, the super high level American card, and then the super high level United card. And I need to read it more thoroughly, but I did not see medical specific coverage. EVAC coverage, they had the trip cancellation, trip interruption, all the baggage and everything. So I personally always take out at least the medical, even though I've got a wealth of cards.
Mm-hmm. Karen asks, are you able to recommend insurance plans that you have consistently heard good reviews about? So I will say, I always tell people there's no one size fits all plan because everyone has different circumstances themselves and issues that worry them and keep them up at night. Because that's really, at the end of the day, we're trying to have peace of mind here. That's what insurance is supposed to do. Wendy and I have found in our many years talking to travelers and studying the industry as journalists, that TravelX is the provider that we have gotten the best feedback about from travelers who tell us that their claims were processed quickly and in their favor. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, I just say that on travelinsurance.com, you can actually go and read real customer reviews. So, we have actually the most reviews of any of the comparison sites. They're all verified, third-party verified reviews. We have reviews by individual plans and providers. We also solicit reviews from people who notify us that they had to make a claim. So we ask them to review the claims process. So you can actually go into the site, go into the reviews. You can filter by people who've made claims. One of the things that my co-founder and I did when we started travelinsurance.com was to say, okay, let's again, take one of the complexities out of the process, and let's just work with the top carriers, the most recognizable names like TravelX, as you mentioned, like Generali, like Travel Guard. We came to meet and learn about new providers as well. Well, not new, but new to us at the time, who are also really good providers. And so we work with Access Assistance. We work with Trawick International. We work with, we like to think that instead of working with everybody under the sun, we're going to keep our list of providers a little bit smaller, tighter, in order to, make sure that they're delivering on the promise of customer service to our customers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as a reminder, travel insurance is regulated state by state. So what could be great for somebody in Kansas might not be the best choice for somebody that lives in Florida. So using a comparison site, like that is licensed in, and looks at the policies in all 50 states is a really important, it's important to compare and not just rely on, well, my friend had this one.
Yeah, that's a good point. Susan asks, how do annual plans treat the pre-existing condition clause?
In our quote results today, we don't have annual plans in our sort of comparison results. We do have partners that offer annual plans, and I have to go back and actually look to see what the current treatment is for pre-existing conditions in those annual plans. It I would say probably resembles the other purchase requirements for the pre-existing condition waiver as a single trip plan. But that's something we'd be happy to follow up with.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can follow up. Kathleen says, I'm going to a legal conference in London. Will trip insurance cover the cost of the legal conference as well as the hotel and flight expenses? I guess she's asking maybe about covering business expenses and the conference itself if she had to cancel.
Yeah, so there are some plans that will cover registration, like non-refundable registration costs, and then some plans will not treat that as a trip cost. So probably not the answer that you wanted, but you have to look at the individual plan to see what is included in the trip cost. For the most part, you can if it's the cost of your transportation, your excursion costs, your hotels, accommodations, cruise, tour, the cost of the tour, if it's non-refundable and you paid for it in advance, it's going to be covered. But then there are some plans that will do that. We'll do it for conferences.
Bob says, I've usually self-insured given that the break even is one problem out of every 10 trips. If you assume a 10% premium, when and why should I think differently? And I would say, well, that's true on the cancellation side of things, right? If that math works for the trip cancellation side, the medical side is a different issue, right? If you, God forbid, have a medical episode on one of those trips, that can be a six-figure situation. So and again, I think it comes up down to, personally, I think it comes down to what keeps you up at night, right? If losing however much money you spent on a trip, whether that's $10,000 or $5,000 or $50,000, if that worries you, then it probably makes sense to cover it. If you're not worried, if you figure life's a risk, then that's not such a big deal for you. Anyone?
Yeah, and I think that leads to one of the sort of insider tips. If you want to self-insure the cost of the trip, so for trip cancellation or interruption, if you're going to self-insure that, you can actually still buy a travel insurance plan with the other benefits. So with the post-departure benefits, so you would have trip delay coverage, you'd have baggage loss and baggage delay coverage, you would have the medical expense piece, you'd have the embedded medical evacuation piece, you'd have all of those things still in the plan. You just wouldn't have trip interruption or trip cancellation coverage. And the way to do that on a site like travelinsurance.com is just enter 0 in the trip cost field, put all of the other trip information in, and select a quote. And you may be very surprised at how affordable a non-trip cancellation plan is with those other post-departure benefits. Really, the majority of the cost of a travel insurance plan is going to be embedded in the trip cancellation piece. So if that's off the table, you will find a range of choices that give you all of those post-departure benefits.
Yeah, I've had medical only coverage for $50 for a trip at times.
Yeah.
Quite affordable. Sherry, we've got a couple questions about the MedJet discount that you're offering for Wow Week. One traveler wants to know, there's also an ARP discount. Can we use both for the annual policy? And also, how do we refer to this evening in the discount if we want to take advantage? Is there a code? Can you kind of explain how travelers can get that discount?
Yeah, you have to pick one.
Okay.
Either the AARP or the Wow Week. You can't combine them. And to access the Wow Week, it's on Wendy's website. It's just medjet.com/WendyPerrin.
And if you click on the ad or the box, MedJet box on our homepage, you'll get there as well, and it will automatically take the discount into consideration. Oh, great! Thank you, Flory. She just put the
you can enroll by phone too. We actually have human beings that you can talk to, and they're awesome. And we take enrollments over the phone. They can answer any questions that you might have before you purchase. They're great.
Fantastic.
So you would just refer to Wendy Perrin's Wow Week special.
Great. Patricia asks, if I have a MedJet membership and need to be evacuated, can my family come with me?
Typically the air ambulances will fit the spouse, like one companion. They are small aircraft, so there are weight constrictions. So if there's a lot of specialty equipment that needs to get loaded, like when we added we were the first ones to add transport for COVID, and when we first did it, it wasn't guaranteed the spouse could fit on, because the isolation booths were so heavy, and they were installed. After a while, they were just like, yeah, just put this thing over them. And then the spouses jump back on. But typically a spouse, small amount of luggage will fit, unless they're very large people, because it is weight dependent.
Nancy says, thank you for answering the questions. And what is Sherry's contact info website? So Sherry, can you share what you're comfortable sharing with our audience?
Oh yeah, we're just medjet.com, or you can call the office and either talk to membership services, or you can ask for me. I mean, I answer the phone, or if the membership services are busy, half the time you will get me, because you will get a human here. And if the phones are all busy over there, it actually rings out to the entire building, because any call could be a transport call. And so every single person here can pick up the phone, and will pick up the phone from the CEO on down to the mailroom guy. Overflows always get answered. So
can't think of another business that does that.
Yeah, it's funny, because sometimes, like, I'll get halfway through the conversation and the person will stop and they're like, can I just say, it is so nice to talk to a human being that knows what they're talking about, is full of information. I can't, like, they're so happy, and it's anytime.
You're getting a thumbs up for that too in the chat, in the Q&A box. And Patricia also wants to know, when does Wow Week end? I think it goes through, remind me when the discount ends.
Oh, the discount ends when we get back in the office on Monday. So 9 a.m. on Monday.
9 a.m. Monday. Okay. Okay, let's see. Just two more questions. Anita, can you speak a bit about primary coverage versus secondary coverage? It's a great question. Stan, can you briefly?
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot. Primary coverage just means that in the travel insurance policy will be the first payer of a claim, irrespective of any other insurance you may have. It just makes the process easier, the claims process easier, simplifies it. And so again, think about it as travel insurance will pay out first. Secondary coverage means that if you have coverage with other insurance, that you would have to seek the compensation or the claim through your other insurance first. And to the extent that it wasn't covered, then you would file the claim with the travel insurance company. So they would pay what is not covered by your other insurance. And so you can think about it, if you don't have other insurance, then a secondary plan effectively is a primary plan. If there's no other insurance out there, the secondary plan will be the source to pay out the insurance. I think where it comes really into play and is most relevant is on the health insurance side. So if you have existing health insurance coverage that may cover you for a particular set of medical expenses, a secondary plan would require you to file with your existing health plan first And then if they reject the coverage or they cover only a certain amount of the coverage, what is not covered would then be coverable under your travel insurance plan. So it adds another step to the claims process. But again, if you don't have other insurance for a relevant claim, so for instance, trip cancellation, you likely don't have any other insurance for trip cancellation. So it's the travel insurance plan will be the insurance that covers you.
Oh my gosh, people start talking about claims, and I'm so happy we don't have those. Like, there's no claim forms. If it's a membership program, not insurance. So if we transport somebody, they'll never see a bill. They'll never see a claim. Some nice guy named Bobby will call about a month later and ask them how their transport was, how and how they're doing, and that's it. It's so nice.
Sherry, I think you can close out our evening. Our last question from Anne is, does MedJet consider a 23-year-old living at home a dependent, not in school and disabled, part of the family?
Well, definitely part of the family, but on a family membership, it's a pretty hard cut on age, regardless of situation. So it's 19 if they're not in school, up through 22. So until they're 23, if they are a full-time student. Beyond that, even if they're still a student till 30, please don't let that be my son. That it doesn't count. Although, like you can always get them an individual membership. So
right.
A lot of our readers do have, like me, do have college age students, students in college in colleges across the country. And so I think this works well for them.
Yeah, because it works domestically. So my friend's son played soccer in Wisconsin, and that was her number one thing is, wow, he's going to get injured and laid up. I want to move him home. So.
Right. Well, wow, we got through 43 questions. I wonder if we set a record there.
I know.
One just came in quickly. Can you speak to a live person at travelinsurance.com? Do you have representatives?
Yes, we do. We do. We have people in-house, and for plans where we don't, or during hours where we don't have coverage, we will connect you with a dedicated agent at our partners, at our insurance carrier partners. So yeah, there's always a live person. We also do live chat. We do, if you need to reach us, we will get to you.
Excellent.
So nice to talk to a human being nowadays.
Yes, it
so
is.
rare, and a human being who actually knows what's going on. Anyway,
you would hope that wasn't so rare, but I get stopped mid-conversation so frequently that it must be.
No, I feel like the pandemic, just like systems got so disrupted, and ever since, it's like, can I just find a human being who knows the answer? Anyway, speaking of human beings who know the answer, thank you so much for joining us. Stan Sandberg of travelinsurance.com, Sherry Howell of MedJet. We so appreciate your taking the time to answer our readers' questions. And thank you so much to our readers and viewers and listeners and travelers who joined us tonight and for Wow Week. And if you would like, our last Wow Week travel talk is tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Friday, and it's your favorite photojournalist, my husband Tim Baker. A lot of you know his photos because they're all over the website. Anyway, he is going to be sharing tips for how to take better travel photos with your phone. So can't wait for that one. Anyway, again, thank you so much for joining us,
everybody.
Thank you,
Wendy.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.